So safety is not exactly what you would associate with sword fighting, hopefully. Unless you're the tanky barbarian or knows what in a fantasy setting and there's a healer nearby, you generally want to be concerned with your own safety. In fact, it's more important than doing damage to the opponent, not dying in the process, right? So how can you do that? Yeah, get good. How can you do that in a simple way, semi-simple way that keeps you fairly safe, even if you don't know what to expect from the opponent? Say this is a self-defense situation, like this is like a bandit or a dude who insulted my wife or whatever, like we need to fight for honor, okay? So, and I don't know him, I don't know how he fights. So what am I gonna do? Well, most definitely not, because this is how you die. So I need to figure out what the hell he does. There are a few ways. One way is to just kind of cut a little, like do like little cuts out of measure, meaning at a distance where the opponent can't hit you, just to see what he's doing, right? Better is you cut. Oh, now you've got a bind. Now you actually got some information here, because now I can feel what's going on. I can not just see it, but I can also feel pressure or lack of pressure, things like that. If I feel that there's no pressure on his end, I can just win the bind and come in, and then I see what he does. You know, like right now, he defended against that. Okay, all right. So this way, I keep myself safe because I keep my blade between, or his blade away from me. I keep my blade in between, and depending on what he's doing, I can figure out how to respond to that. So let's slow this down. If I win the bind, and the way I do that is by turning my edge against his flat. Show it this way so you can actually see it. So turning my edge in against his flat and moving the strong of my blade, which is the lower third, closer to the upper third of his blade, because this means I have mechanical advantage, and because I've taken the initiative and I'm threatening him, he needs to respond to that in some way. Basically, the panic response is he just swipes it over there, right? As soon as he does, I now have access here, because he overcommitted. There's a better way of doing that. So if he wants to pull this off and he thrusts, I only move as much as I need to, just enough to basically get it away from my face, because I don't want to overcommit, because then he can do things to me. The exact opposite of what you often see, the big, huge movement. So if I decide I want to cut him and I leave the bind, I just do it like this, even if I don't exaggerate quite as much, this is still bad, right? However, what I can do is keep the movement very tight and also keep some level of control over his blade. I'm sticking to the blade most of the way, like I'm not immediately leaving it and coming around, but I'm sticking to it for as long as I can, and then I use my hand to manipulate either his blade or his hand. This push is a variation I personally like, but in the manuscripts it's shown as hooking the forearm with your grip or pommel and pulling down. That way I'm much safer. So even if he tries something, in the meanwhile, because I'm sticking so close to it, okay, he did something else, so now I'm just not gonna adjust. So I still have time to change the course of action if I need to. And right now I'm digging my guard into his forearm, which is also not fun. So it's just a much more efficient movement, and it just gave me an advantage. If I release and come in like this, I've immediately got his blade in my face. If I keep in contact for as long as possible and he tries to thrust meanwhile, then I notice, okay, this has changed what I'm dealing with here, but I'm still okay. And here, boom, we got that. I can also go for his arm, things like that. So much tighter, more covered sort of approach. Essentially, if he just keeps going after me, and I stick to the bind as much as possible, right? I'm pretty safe here. And then whenever I feel safe, this is best to do once he's already overcommitted. So if he's pushed over there, I just let him go. Can be either under or over, can be, you know, whichever angle, downward or rising or whatever, or it can even be to the leg. Things like this, particularly if I combine it with covering the hand. The risk is primarily whenever we leave the bind. Like, whoever leaves the bind takes a certain risk, simply because right at that moment, if I leave the bind, he can attack me. And I don't, at that moment, I can't do anything, because the point of my blade is not threatening him at all right now. Whether it's here or here, there's still some threat, but at the same time, because I left the bind, he can freely move in now. I say freely, but of course, there's still the problem that my blade is here, right? So, ideally, I want to make the smallest circle possible to get around this blade. So not, and this is one of the reasons why you don't see that in movies and video games. It's too hard to see. You need big movements, you need anticipatory movements, you need telegraphing out the window so the viewer can actually see what the hell is happening without slow-mo. But this, on the other hand, is a little bit harder to pick up on. So, again, the smaller the movement, the better. And if he responds to that, I also need to deal with it, right? If I disengage and he immediately pushes it over, again, I go with where the pressure is going. I can feel what's going on. And know, so if he pushes it aggressively over there, I know what to do. If I try to thrust and he moves off, there we go. So with short blades and a free offhand, a lot of this happens. With two hands on the sword, it can look very similar. So here, again, he's kind of crossing the line here. I don't like that very much either. I need to aggressively retake that line, or I need to just yield to it and cover on the other side, so then I can hurt him while being safe. That's the idea. If you can avoid the risk, because if you think about it, if I just cut at him, there's so many things that can happen to me here. If he thrusts at the same time, we may both be critically injured. There are a lot of things that can happen here in a very short amount of time that you may not be able to respond to as well as if you got this. I can't even be a sneaky bastard about it and just grab the blade. Here, of course, you gotta think about, again, the opposite of what we see in movies and video games. Not this, because this does very little to protect myself. This does the exact opposite, gives him a free shot. But rather this. So the purpose here is not to cut the opponent with this particular opener here. You can absolutely open with a cut that's intended to do a lot of damage, but this way, I mean, if it hits good, but chances are it's probably going to result in a bind. And I'm doing it this way simply so I don't expose myself, because even if this misses or nothing happens, the sword is still in front of me. So I can still respond to what's going on here. You can also open with a thrust, because the same way this does that too. Okay, so now I know he's over here, I might be able to dip under and cut, or I come over top here. Again, the moment I leave it is where there's a bit of risk. So if I want to avoid that, I will cover first, because just note how much time I spend away from his blade here as opposed to here. right? I'm immediately back on his sword. So that's way safer for me to do. And I can still stab him at leisure pretty much. This is a good position. If I want to force it, I can even go in all the way. I brought the strong of my blade over his blade. Even if it's over the strong of his, where there he can push back better. But because I'm on top, gravity is basically helping me. If I move in the process of him trying to get out of there, so try to disengage, I can already move in, and now I've got something here. This is not a valid attack at the moment, but it will be if I do this, because now I'm slicing his femoral artery on the inside of the thigh, which means he's going to bleed out pretty quickly. Right, I know how the internet operates. This does not mean this is the ultimate, perfect, best way to fight with a sword ever, okay? It's one way. It's a way that works quite well. You wouldn't do that with all types of swords. Just for the sake of completion, because I know that people like to jump to conclusions, there are plenty of other things you can do, all right? So, for example, if he thrusts, I don't have to go for a bind, but if he comes in for a thrust, I can beat it aside, in whichever way I want, and then follow up. Or if he's in a forward-facing guard to begin with, I can knock it aside and attack like this. I can play it defensively, where I wait for him to cut. As soon as he does, I do a deflectional parry and counter, or if he attacks, I knock it to the side. There are a lot of things also cutting into the cut at the same time, so he cuts, and I displace it and strike it aside, which means either, if we're at the right distance, I cut him in the head right away, or I'm set up to thrust. So there are plenty of things you can do. This is not the only one, but I do think the safest way to open against an unknown opponent is probably seeking the bind, because of how well you're covered and how much info it gives you. With sabers, we get some additional shenanigans because these are strongly curved. Right here, because of the curvature, I have some extra angles here. So I can do this, kind of displacing and thrusting. I can also do this other side. Maybe from this angle you can actually see. So I can also reach here because this just curves around. So that also means that if I come in and he pushes over there, I might be able to change the angle and get him anyway. The drawback of doing this is I've just basically opened myself up. The moment I go here, there's his counter. So I need to be aware of that, which means I really need him to overcommit first. So he needs to be all the way over there already, and then I need to step offline too. Ideally cover as well. With this curvature, you can also kind of hook it down and pull the opponent's sword down and then go for the cut. Again, this needs sideways movement because otherwise I'm going to be a real dumbass and stab myself. So you need to move it down, move offline, not slip on the snow hopefully, or on the other side. That's about it. So binding and winding, pretty useful. Why don't you see it in movies and video games? Well, particularly in video games, it's really hard to do mechanically because what we need for this, feeling what's going on and being able to adjust the pressure and a lot of fine motor skills, is just not what you can really translate well to even VR controls, let alone, controller, keyboard, mouse, what have you. It just doesn't really work that well. Hellish Chord has a bit of that. It's got a little bit of, you can kind of jerk the sword from a bind to create an opening, stuff like that. But it's kind of awkward. It's just not easy to translate into game mechanics. In movies, you would have to do that pretty cleverly with slow-mo and the right angle. That would be the cinematic way, I guess. Boom, boom. Well, maybe that gave some of you inspiration. At the very least, you should be able to do that in writing. Describe a scene like this. Again, in gaming, it's going to be hard. Movies, series, maybe. Might be able to find a way to make that look not only good, but also clear enough that the viewer actually sees what the hell's going on. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and on guard.